Hello, welcome to the Equilibrium once again. This is the 60th episode of this amazing show. Today we are happy, we have a birthday to celebrate. It is not for any of us here on the set, but for Uganda. The 58th birthday of Uganda, if you can call it that. The Independence Day. I was there just a few days ago and we were celebrating 58 years since this other flag, called Union something, was brought down, and then the flag of Uganda, the beautiful black, yellow, red, was of course hoisted up as we embraced a new era. But that's not all we shall talk about. We shall connect that with what has been for the economy since then, since the 9th of October 1962 up to today, which is October 2020. And remember, in a pandemic. Anyway, my name is Dan Ayebale, and I will take you through this in the next 1 or 1.5 hours. And by the end of the show, we shall give context to what it has been for the economy in Uganda as compared to other countries who probably got independence at the very same time, or around 1962, 63, and then compare and see where we can go, where we can get the recommendations from, where are the success stories, and maybe what we can improve to see that in the next 58 years, I don't know if we shall still be alive. Maybe it will be a discussion that will be held by our grandchildren to see if we can be on another page and maybe a better page. Let me introduce you to my guests today. I will start with one very huge gentleman who is joining us on Zoom, and is Professor Balunywa of the Makerere University Business School. He's the principal, the big man at the head of the Makerere University Business School, a very, very seasoned professional, a very well-known economist, and a very well-respected personality in the corridors of economics. He will join us on Zoom, and we shall be able to pick his views on this very topic of the economy 58 years after independence. To join me on the panel where we are seated right here is ladies first, Christine. You're welcome once again to the Equilibrium. Yes, Christine is an economist and a banker. I'm also having from the far left Francis Muhire, who is also an economist and CEO of a company called Neo-Econometrica, which is an economics consultancy. Last but not least, I have Enoch Jumba. I have Enoch Jumba, who is an associate economist. You're welcome on the Equilibrium. It is his first time on this amazing show. And as the host, I take this honor to welcome you. Hope to have you more and more of the times to come. To begin with, like I said, we shall discuss economics, but right now we shall not talk about 1 year, 2 years, but economics for 58 years. Happy independence, Ugandans. I'm very happy that we are celebrating this at a time where we are fighting a pandemic, and visibly, recently we had Uganda being ranked among the best countries which have fought COVID-19. That will be a topic for another day. But for now, let's talk economics. My guests here on the panel and professor on Zoom, I'd like us to discuss, maybe do a recap of what the economy has been, how it has been developing. We want to maybe remind our dear viewer out there what it was like in 1962 and what it is like in 2020. Where do we compare with other economies? I'll start with Francis Muhire, and we want to do a recap. We want to remind our dear viewer what it was like in 1962 and what it is like in 2020, and what are those strides we've made.
Thank you, Dan. Good evening, our viewers out there. And allow me to take this opportunity to congratulate upon all Ugandans out there for the 58th Independence Day. Thank you. It's been a long journey as far as Uganda's economy is concerned. As you're all aware that we got our independence in 1962, a lot has happened in this economy. First of all, around 1962, Uganda's GDP was around 400 million USA dollars, and today we have 28 billion US dollars. Our GDP. So, well, that is some achievement. Though, as we go ahead, I will tell you that maybe we could have been, we could have done better than that. So a lot has happened since that time. Of course, we have had different governments. We had Obote one, actually, whom I think did a better job. And then we had, Amin coming in 1970s.
When you say better, that means there's a comparison.
Yeah.
Compared with who?
Just wait, because I'm coming. And then we had, Amin, and Amin's time, as far as the economy is concerned, was disastrous. You saw, actually expelling the Asians. And then we had Obote 2 was a bit struggling. That's why I was like the Obote 1 was better. So Obote 2 was struggling. And currently we have the current government, I think, which has been in power for over 35 years. So you can see if Uganda is today 58th, so 35 years of it has been consistently taken by, the current government of Museveni. And when they came in, in late 80s, they were a bit struggling, but early 90s, we saw an improvement in economic growth, human capital development. But as I talk right now, they seem to be consistently off track, and they could get worse than even actually the previous governments. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis. Thank you for making a comparison between the governments that have really been here and then to the one that we have right now. Chip in there, Enoch. I want to know, what is your take on what it has been since 1962? Do you think you're on the right track, or you think, the opposite, we are not on the right track?
Thank you for hosting me. I'm very happy for Uganda today. The freedom to manage or mismanage own affairs. Whether we've done that is up for debate. Whether we have actually managed or mismanaged is up for debate. But I think for me, where I want to start from is a point where we know that in 62, Uganda's population could have been anywhere around 8 million citizens. So 7 to 8 million citizens. Today, 42 and counting million people. What does that mean to us? For example, that would put an inquest on whether the infant mortality rates have fallen or risen. Maternal mortality rates have also fallen significantly. And that can be, I'm not saying that that could be an upload given just to the healthcare system, but the improvement that has taken place over the years. Yeah? And I think that is to be applauded somehow. We haven't stricken the demographic dividend yet, and I think the demographic transition is on course. Maybe now the question now we should ask is where do we move from that point to make sure that now that the birth rates continue to rise and the death rates are falling, how now do we come to the point where we reduce the birth rates and see that the economy becomes sustainable and the economy moves faster than the rate at which the population is growing? So I think from that point, it would be interesting to know that. I would say that in the past, the people living below the international poverty line were much higher than they are now. But as Francis has already indicated, we are beginning to see that beginning to recede. For example, a household survey that was made by UBOS in 2017 revealed something really interesting. People living below the international poverty line were about 19% in 2013. That survey revealed that it had risen. Actually, the initial draft that we read showed 27%, but that was revised downwards to 25%. I don't know why. Maybe that can be explained by the UBOS bosses. But what does that say? We were making strides towards progress, and now we are beginning to see that beginning to recede. So I think for me, there is progress, but a lot of things are beginning to hamper that progress at the current.
Thank you very much, Enoch. Let's cross over to Christine. Christine, 1962. Yes, maybe you were not there then. But now 2020, that's 58 years. To you as an economist, where are we going? Are we really on the right track, or you could think maybe we could have done better?
Okay. Good evening, viewers. Now, analyzing a 50-year-old economy, you cannot analyze this thing, the economy, just on a wholesale, because we've had different regimes coming in, and they did not all have the same policies. For example, from 1962 to around 1971, that is almost Obote I regime. Obote I regime was more of a socialist kind of economy, where he had the common man's charter. He looked more about, during his time, he believed that the the challenges that the economy was faced with was basically disease, literacy levels, and during that time he had 90% of the population living in village settings, with depending on agriculture, and the economy was vibrant during that time because of the cooperative kind of system. So basically they would easily get market for their produce. So the Obote I regime did a good job. Then we also had literacy levels going up during that time, because he was basically concerned about ensuring that the population is able to get these different social services. So just like I said, in those different regimes, every government came up with they set their own economic reforms depending on what they thought was the need of the population. Then from that time, you had Amin coming in, which was really disastrous, and for him, his expenditure mainly went to the army. So these other sectors of the economy really suffered a great deal. Then around that time, around 1967, you had the East African Community being formed, basically with the aim of coming up with a common market. That is Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania coming together to ensure that they have a common market for their different produce. But with everything that was, with the political turmoil that was happening in Uganda, that's around 1977, yes, we had the East African Community collapsing, basically because one of the major reasons is because of the political turmoil that was taking place in Uganda. But then when the NRM government came on board, it found a shattered economy, and they tried to come up with different policies, different avenues, different reforms that they thought would help to stabilize our economy once again. They came up with policies, for example, structural adjustment programs. They came up with economic reform programs. They came up with introduced privatization, came up with liberalization. So they basically put a lot on table to ensure that the economy is able to pick up again. For example, in 1987, that is around June to July, our economy had an inflation rate of over 100%. But by 1991, it had reduced to 26%. Those are during the early years of the government. So I think our current government did a great job making sure that our economy is revived. But as the years have gone on, with the different practices that come along, after 35 years or so in government, we see that what that actually put on table, starting up as something that was really ideal to develop our economy, has reached a level of either stagnation or retarding in some other aspects of our economy.
Thank you very much. Dear viewer, you're still on the Equilibrium, and we're talking the Ugandan economy since 1962, when we acquired our independence. We have online Professor Barunywa, who is going also to tell us about what he thinks has been the progress. What are the highlights, and maybe where we could have done better. We all agree that professors lived in all these years where we're talking. Maybe some of us were not here in 1962, but pretty much I think he was here in 1962. So maybe you could be the referee on this. All right, we shall have the professor give us his views on this.
As we celebrate the 58th independence of the Republic of Uganda, I would rather use the word as we mark rather than celebrate. Though at times it's good to celebrate events. We need to look back at where we've come from and where we are today and where we are going. Right now, with the coronavirus pandemic, it's very difficult to know where the country is going economically, because that will also affect the political developments in the country. But the questions which people are raising is, why is there massive poverty in Uganda, in Africa? Why are the millions of people in these countries poor? Yet these countries obtained independence from the then colonial masters. So the question you need to ask yourself is why? But more important is, how do we get out of that situation? So to be able to understand a little bit where we are, many economists, especially the young ones, would like to know, where have we come from? I'll go back to Uganda's political history, that Uganda had kingdoms. The powerful ones were Buganda, Bunyoro, then, and the European explorers found the country more or less producing for subsistence. There was some trade that was introduced, especially by the Arabs as they came in. And what turned out was, after that, there was slave trade. So, besides that, really, there was not much business as we know it today going on in many parts of Africa, Uganda inclusive. So the British, who came to trade, came mainly to look after the source of the Nile in Uganda, because they wanted to be able to control Egypt and to be able to control various parts where the trade was. Of course, the Nile River is that majestic river that you must know as the longest river in the world. People have interest in it, and it gives livelihood to millions of people along its banks. So the British come in here and they establish a protectorate in Uganda. They find that it's very expensive to run the country. Therefore, they introduced taxes in 1903 through the establishment, through the introduction of coffee, so that the peasants could be able to contribute to the administration of the country. Britain came in and established a 20-year roaming plan around 1920. And of course, they had their own interests. They wanted to sell goods to this country. They wanted to be able to extract whatever was possible in this country. And slowly, business was introduced, but it was not for Ugandans. Business was for the British companies that came in, the foreigners that came in. And of course, the Arabs came in to trade too. The Indian community in Uganda starts off with the building of the Uganda Railway. They came as cooliers to build the railway. And as they remained behind, they started establishing businesses. Their culture of business has more strong roots than that of the Ugandan community. As the economy started changing, Africans were mainly in production of agriculture products, coffee, cotton, and the Uganda Railway, which was built, especially the Busoga Loop, was primarily to tap into the cotton production that was in the areas of Gulu, Lira, Busoga, and some parts of Bunyoro. In the 1940s and 1950s, the many African Ugandans wanted to see that they also participate in business. And for this reason, we have the famous riots, Uganda riots, led by nationalist Waike Musazi. They wanted to see that Ugandans could come into business. Of course, Uganda started establishing cooperative movements. These cooperative movements were intended to bring together poor people so that they could be able to negotiate prices. And traditionally, by the time of independence in 1962, the ordinary Ugandan grew food for self-consumption, had coffee or cotton and some other few products which they sold, and were able to get iron sheets, bicycles, take children to school. That was all. That's the life people look forward to. And the few who were able to run into schools and go up higher, they would end up in the university and go into offices as civil servants. So Ugandans were not in business. And as Uganda prepared for independence in the early 1960s, the protectorate government requested the World Bank to advise on the future of Uganda. And the World Bank mission in 1961 came in and advised that the ordinary Ugandans could continue in peasant agriculture and what was known as backyard industries. The Indians and the Europeans could do big business. Mark you, in 1952, the protectorate government had established the Uganda Development Corporation, UDC, which was a parastatal intended to support the industrialization of Uganda. This UDC came in as a result of the thinking then of the British Labour government in the UK, because the Labour government is socialist. They saw public enterprises as one of the ways in which to develop a country. And as a result of that, they established the UDC in Uganda. And as they did this, the UDC started establishing businesses and going into partnerships with Indians and other foreigners to establish various industries in Uganda. So by 1962, the World Bank recommended that government should not spend money in social services. And they recommended the model where Africans would be in agriculture production, peasant agriculture production, Indians in trade, and the Europeans in manufacturing. So when Obote takes over in 1962 as Prime Minister of Uganda, he actually says he adopted the recommendations of the World Bank when they established the Planning Commission, which was to spearhead planning in Uganda. And indeed, Uganda's first development plan, 5-year development plan, 1962-63 to I think 1967-68, was based on recommendations of the World Bank. Of course, on the political side, Obote UPC had aligned with Kabaka KY, which belonged to Uganda Kingdom, to be able to take power. If they had not done that, DP would have been the ruling party in power at that time. What happens in 1966 is that Obote fell out with the Kabaka of Uganda. The Kabaka of Uganda was ousted. And in 1967, something happened in Tanzania. Nyerere declared the Arusha Declarations, which were introducing socialism in Arusha. And in Tanzania, Obote in 1969 announced what was known as the Common Man's Charter, the move to the left, which involved the industrialization of the nationalization of industries in Uganda. So what happened in terms of economic growth? The economy was growing by about 4.5% per year from 1962 to about 1970. And the economy, in terms of policy, the economy was being driven primarily by the private sector. So Africans were enjoying themselves, growing their own beans and maize and bananas and eating them while they produced cotton and coffee and a few other things to sell to the outside, to the business community. Africans were not largely in business. So in terms of the political scene, Obote comes up and establishes socialism through the Common Man's Charter. And the second 5-year development plan was adjusted as a result of the thinking of Obote to put more emphasis on the public sector rather than the private sector in the country. 1971, Idi Amin overthrows Obote. And some of the reasons that Amin raises was that Obote had nationalized industries. And of course, the politics behind Obote's overthrow is different, but that is the economics that came up. And Amin suspended the development planning, and he drafted what was known as the action plan. You know, after suspending when it was due to develop the third 5-year development plan. Now, Idi Amin is reported to have dreamt that he had just to expel Indians in the country. Of course, there are other stories, but let us assume that's the official story. And the Indians were given 90 days to leave Uganda. When the Indians left, it created a vacuum in the entrepreneurship sector, in the business sector in the country. These Indians dominated trade. And also what happened was that manufacturing walked across the border and went to Kenya. Some of the industries that existed in Uganda then closed shop and they went to Kenya. So Idi Amin, we start seeing a decline in the economy. Between 1971 when he took power and 1979 when he left, the economy had collapsed by about 25% in terms of GDP. The economy had really gone down. I mean, he was very lucky that during his time, the prices of coffee were so high that he was able to fund most of his activities. Remember, coffee was even exported on planes, you know, so he had very good value and had revenues to fund his activities. But also remember, the activities were not many as such because the economy had really gone down. Now, a very interesting development between 1969 and 1979 is that those few Africans who had started business, including the late Mulwana, Professor Havamuno, and a few others, became prominent. And they are today what we would like to call Uganda's leading business people, the African entrepreneur. So the departure of the Asian community actually created a local African entrepreneur, but they didn't succeed. I'll give you a case in point. I had an uncle of mine who used to work in the night hill, and he used to ride his bicycle to work. He was allocated a shop in Ginger Town, powerful shop with money in it. And after about 3-4 years, the shop was run down and she was even left the premises. So we failed to develop entrepreneurs, though people were given opportunity to do business. Of course, 1979, Amin made those mistakes, invaded Tanzania, and he was thrown out of Tanzania, finally chased out of Uganda. You had the UNLA government, Uganda National Liberation Army government. And we have elections in 1981, and Obote comes back with the UPC. And the first thing Obote did was make sure that he does not repeat the economic mistakes of 1969, 1971. He started what was known as the rehabilitation plan and the revised rehabilitation plan, in which he accepted the private sector as the key growth of the economy. When you accept the private sector, it means the World Bank and IMF are going to give you the money that you need to grow the country. The questions are who actually grows it. Unfortunately for Obote, because of the challenges he had with Yoweri Museveni went to the bush, disputing the election that had been held. And of course, we're familiar with that story, 1981, 1985, 86, when the 85 Obote runs out from the country. It's taken over by Tito Okello. From the economics point of view, really, there was not much economics to talk about during that period because of this, the civil unrest. President Museveni takes power in January 1986, and he came with a 10-point program, which worked for 1 year. And in May 1987, he led major reforms in the economy to, again, make sure that the private sector was the leader in economic growth. In 1987, in May 1987, President Museveni, who also doubles as the Minister of Finance legally as President of the country, he led those major reforms that attracted World Bank and IMF back into the country. So in terms of growth patterns, there had been an additional decline in the economy between 1989 and 1985. I think the economy declined by about 7% in terms of its GDP. So we start off from a very, very low base, a base possibly which you could say was much lower than the independence time. So when you see that our GDP today is about $28 billion, it's very little. But what was it in 1969? When you see that the Kenyan economy is twice the size of Uganda, you should be able to see it in terms of the Kenyan economy continue to grow without challenges, yet the Ugandan economy was in problems and it was in decline. So one of the major things that happened after these announcements were the getting lists of all parastatals to be sold, and indeed many were sold. The most the one which I was also involved in was the Coffee Marketing Board. At that time, the Bank of Uganda would go out into the villages to pay farmers. This was not the role of the central bank, but that's how bad the economy had become. So when they liberalized the economy, coffee production went up, farmers got higher value, and this was followed by a number of things. In many sectors, for instance, in the telecommunications sector, we had Uganda Posts and Telecommunications Corporation. At that time, in the 1990s, I think there were 40,000 telephones in the country. Today, we have over 20 million subscribers, driven by the private sector. The telecommunications has become the biggest sector in the economy, with MTN, the leading company, paying the largest amount of taxes. And then we had one radio Uganda, we had one TV. The radio TV would close at 11 p.m. in the night. And today you have hundreds of radios and tens of television stations that are broadcasting to Ugandans. This is all a result of the private sector privatization initiative in the country. Many sectors were privatized, many companies were sold, and we saw tremendous growth in these companies. What really happens in the Obote II period, 1982, 1981, 1985, there were a number of Indians who had actually remained back during the Amin period. They had been very quiet. These capitalized on what was taking place, and they became some of the biggest companies in the country even today. Many other Indians who had left the country returned, including Sudhir, whose story, having returned with $20,000, and today is a multi-billionaire. They returned and they went into business and succeeded in business. The economy grew. I think Uganda's finest economic performance was 1995, 1996, when the economy really grew by leaps and bounds.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that submission. Dear viewer, you're still on the Equilibrium. And just to remind you, we do this every Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Yeah, 7:15 p.m. is when we do this. That's when we go live and talk about this and more topics about economics. So be sure to always catch us on YouTube, and the TV is Neo ETV. That's the channel, and the show is The Equilibrium. So, my dear guests, I thank you right from the beginning for your good views, for your good submissions about what has been for Uganda since 1962, 58 years down the road. It's on record that the first few years after independence, the economy was really growing. We all agree? So what happened after? I mean, for the first like 8 years, Christine, what happened after that? That's what I was saying. Maybe we are talking about other presidents, but that very first president, that very first president, who is credited, maybe not him, but then the economy under him was credited, is credited to him. The economy was moving right in the right direction. Could it be because of we still had that connection with our colonizers? Maybe there was still a connection. What could be the reason for that, and what happened after? What do you think happened after?
Okay. Actually, the World Bank report of 1993 stated that the Ugandan economy in the early 1960s was one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa. So now the question is, what happened afterwards? Yeah, that we're going to try to answer. Now, when you try to analyze the Obote I regime, one of the factors that I will definitely dig into is he looked at he had the common man's charter, communist kind of operating way, socialist kind of, but he was basically, he looked at cooperatives more. He looked at developing cooperatives more. So when we look at his regime, now what happened in between was political chaos. That's why, economics and politics go hand in hand. So if the political environment is not right or conducive, forget about the economy growing. So that's why you're asking why aren't we crediting the other presidents? We had Godfrey Binaisa, Muanga, several. I think the one at the helm at that time was Mutesa, right? Yeah, we had Mutesa. So we had almost 6 presidents in the period of between 1979 and 1986. We had 6 presidents. Imagine that period. In just that short period, you're having 6 presidents. So, and everyone was coming out with a gun. So the economy was never settled to have that conducive environment to enable it to grow. So I think that answers the question of why don't we, as economists, why don't we even want to know what happened in that period?
Moving on, going to this government, we've talked about the Obote 2, Obote 1, the Museveni government we are in right now. Drops of water make an ocean. Francis, do you think we should overlook the contribution of these other people? His Excellencies, who were at the helm of the Ugandan government. Do we have to underlook it and then sweep it under the carpet in terms of the economy?
Thank you, Dan. First of all, we've had 9 presidents since independence. Of course, Obote coming in 2 times. Well, the reason why you only concentrate on Obote 1, Obote 2, and President Museveni is that they have had enough time. The other one had 2 months. They really didn't have ample time to do much, really. That's why we don't want to talk much about them as economists. Yes, so, but still talking about, let's say, these different governments, one thing you need to know is that in 1962, Uganda was a poor or a least developed economy or a low-income country. It was among the poorest nations in this world. Unfortunately, today it is still in that class. Poor, among the poorest countries, low-income country or the least developed economy. Therefore, the question is, it's been 58 years or 50 years, down the road with different presidents. If then we were among the poorest nations, and still today we are among the poorest nations. Of course, there are so many reasons why, and I will first tell you about these structural adjustment changes like privatization. It wouldn't be bad, but how was it handled? How was it handled? It ended up becoming a corruption, like breeding ground. Talking about liberalization of the economy, the challenge is this has bred to extreme capitalism. Not capitalism, but extreme capitalism. You have economic growth, but which is exclusive. It's leaving a big chunk of people out there. 21% of Uganda's population today are below the poverty line. 41.7% live below $1 a day. That is poverty. That is a stinking poverty. So we have this economic growth, let's say the average, which is around 6%, but it's not inclusive. A big chunk of the population are left behind. Therefore, you need to be very careful when you're coming up with policies. These policies might work in the short run, but they may not work in the medium or the long run. So I will tell you this, that in 1962, I want you to compare Uganda and South Korea. Uganda's GDP per capita was at about $67, and that of Korea was about $87. Now, that was 1962. And actually, Korea had just come out of a civil war, which actually almost put its economy to zero. And remember, it was colonized by Japan. And trust me, be happy that you were colonized by British, not Japan of those days. Right. That should be that should be another topic for another day. I'm not going to go deep into that. But I want you to keep note of that, and I want you to come today. Korea's GDP per capita is around $30,000. Uganda's GDP per capita is at around $700. What do you think happened in between there? Very good. That's where I'm taking you. Because first of all, Korea's arable land, actually less of its quota of its total square land is arable compared to Uganda, whose overall arable land is about 60%. And Uganda's total surface area doubles that of Korea. Just as Dr. Jinji said that it's not about the size of the farm, but how much you harvest or reap from the farm. So this is what happened along the way. As we've talked about all these policies, different governments coming in, the problem is that these governments promise to do things, they assume, show the public, give us hopes, but at the end of the day, they're off track. That's why what happened in Korea is that they realized that as you think of revolutionizing the agricultural sector, to feed the manufacturing sector, because it's the agricultural sector which gives you the inputs for the manufacturing sector. But at the same time, you need human capital development. And when you talk of human capital development, it looks at 3 dimensions. One, you're looking at the health, and access to knowledge and standards of living. Meaning that you also have to consider the quality of your population in terms of, is it skilled enough? Because if you transform, let's say, from the agrarian economy to manufacturing and service sector, you need to invest much into your population. And at the same time, you need to make sure that this economic growth is inclusive. No one is left behind. We saw what Korea did between 1960 and 1970. They had only about 5,000 technical institutions. But between 1960 to 1970, they increased that number from 5,000 to 50,000 in order to empower their population, with those skills, that are required to transform from agrarian to the manufacturing and the service sector, which we haven't done here. Talking about technical institutions here, it's like going there, it's like you're condemned or you're the failure of the society. You know, our education system, everyone wants to go into that formal education system, and people don't want to go and get these skills. But the government has a role to play to make sure that we have productive population. So we have economic growth, but it's not inclusive. It is leaving a lot of people behind.
Cross over to Enoch Jumba, and we have your recommendations and your final comments as we wrap up the equilibrium.
Someone once said that independence is not to be confused with freedom. No one is less independent than a free citizen. And so for me, the take home that I want to leave as we celebrate the freedom, which is very we have to really applaud it, because being under the masters of colonialists wasn't a nice thing at all for the people that were living in these times. But we will not be really independent until we have economic freedom for our citizens. So what would I recommend that government looks into really carefully? There are a lot of strides that the government continues to take every now and then to see to it that the people get the financial freedom they need. But up to now, people don't have that economic freedom. Why don't we start to be more intentional about investing where we can reap with the least effort? Even you, when you're going to go for it, it would be more advisable for you to do a job which you put in the least effort but reap much. Uganda's, like she has said, agriculture sector is one of the most underfunded ones, yet the most significant ones. And at the same time, tourism sector is another sector where this country can earn most with the least to put in, because the sector has a wider value chain than many other sectors, and at the same time it has the ability to improve the livelihoods of the poor, because it's by its nature a pro-poor sector. So I think that let us not whine and whimper over things that are not moving well, and continue to have the positive mindset that we are continuously going to move forward, and the government should take the necessary strides to invest where it has the least effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Enoch. Last but not least, Francis Muhide, your final comments and your recommendations as we wrap this up. Actually, the last will be the professor online.
Thank you, Dan. Before you solve a problem, you have to first acknowledge that you have a problem. So before I give my recommendations, I want to tell our viewers out there, even those who are running this government, that since 1962, Uganda has been a least developed economy, or among the poorest economies in this world. So we have to first acknowledge and accept that. It is from that we are going to accept and get to know why. If in 1962 we are doing better than South Korea, which today has a GDP of 1.6 trillion US dollars, we are doing better than Singapore, doing better than, maybe let me leave Qatar. Look at Korea and South Korea. These countries don't have natural resources like we do, but they had to invest in their population. That's what we call human capital development. It's not about natural resources. It's about other aspects like institutions, development, because they play a key role in this. And when you have economic growth like we have in this country, it does not mean that the country is going to develop or the population is going to have an economic freedom, as I put it. Once we have an economic growth that is not inclusive, that doesn't mean anything to the population. That's why we still have a big number of, a big part of the population, still in poverty. That's why Uganda's labor force today, it stands at around 16 million. But we have only 45%, which is, employed, So the other thing is, another thing we need to think about our strength. We are saying, yes, the agricultural sector is our strength, because the over 3/4 of Uganda's land is arable. and we have reliable and ample rainfall. So we need to maximize the strengths, which is in the agricultural sector. Yeah. Why? The agricultural sector contribution to the GDP are declining, which is a good when there's an economic transformation. But the agricultural sector still employs over 71% of the population. And the manufacturing sector is still contributing less than 20%. Instead, we've jumped to the service sector. Now, to develop the manufacturing sector, first you need to revolutionize the agriculture sector. Because of the agriculture sector, which feeds into the manufacturing sector. All the inputs you need in the manufacturing sector come from the agriculture sector. But the problem we have in this country, we keep on singing that agriculture sector is the backbone of this country, and yet it is the least funded sector when we look at our budgets. And instead, we are prioritizing the security and other sectors. Therefore, my recommendations are, still the government should develop institutions. It should be careful about liberalization of the economy because it has bred into extreme capitalism. That's why we have income inequality. The gap every day is widening between the poor and the rich. So whatever we do, we need to think of inclusiveness of the entire or general population. And we have to put economics before politics. Otherwise, we'll keep on singing hopes and will remain one of the most poor countries in this world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. Before I leave you, Professor is still online and we shall have his view about this, about the economy in Uganda. I mean, the final views, the final comments, and the final recommendation to cap this up, and we shall call it a day.
Yes, so what has happened? Fast forward, today, Uganda has a population of about 45 million people, and I think 25% of those are below the poverty line. What is the problem? 25% of them are below the poverty line. So what is the problem? The problem is that Africa has never understood business. I'm sorry to use that word. Africa, today, if you look at who is producing the revenues government earns, it is primarily foreign companies. When the president goes out to say he's looking for investors, whom is he looking for? He's looking for foreigners. Why? Because ordinary Ugandans have failed to make such investments as will be in a position to remove poverty in the country. So to me, the factors that are causing the massive poverty that we have include, one, uncontrolled population growth. If you see the teeming number of young people at different ages everywhere in the country, you get worried. Two is the fact that Africans are not in business as such. They still continue to grow their coffee, cotton, and a few other things, and they've failed to make a breakthrough in terms of understanding and getting into businesses that can actually create better jobs. Three is the education system. Our poverty does not enable us to take all our children to school. As long as the country continues to have this kind of system where people drop out, and vocational education is for those who have failed to succeed, then we cannot develop as a country. So poverty is also related to lack of education and illiteracy in the country. The other factor is the level of corruption. The country is sick in terms of the level of corruption. You can't get a service today without paying money for it. It's very, very difficult to do that. Of course, there are still many decent areas where you'll be able to, get a service, but generally, you have to pay extra money to be able to get a service that you want. The other point is lack of attention to science. Today we are experiencing the fourth industrial revolution, but Uganda has not even joined the first revolution. The first revolution was mechanization, and as you think about mechanization, if we continue to use the ordinary hoe to dig, we have not mechanized, we have not joined the first revolution, and yet the world has gone to the fourth industrial revolution. This is a major problem in terms of the changes in the country, in terms of development. The other challenge, of course, which at times we don't think about, is the world economic system. The world economic system does not favor Africans starting business. Because you don't have science studies, you don't understand the usage of minerals. Therefore, all you do is you license foreign companies to mine, take away the minerals, because they understand the usage. So there's need for Uganda, Africa, to be able to understand, by putting emphasis on science, to understand what's the usage of these minerals. And for this reason, the West has kept Africa continuously in darkness and in problems. Look at what is in Congo. Congo is a very rich country, and the West has not allowed it to have economic stability, political stability, because then they cannot get the minerals that they've been getting from there. So then the World Trade arrangements also do not favor African countries. You know, you produce coffee, but you can't add value to it. You export raw coffee or coffee beans, and Nestle comes in and brings its very expensive powdered coffee from your coffee. All these are some of the factors that continue to make us backward. If we continue to watch the British soccer and take pride in it rather than our own soccer, you can see how far we've gone in terms of indoctrination. We can never produce a product. Right now, you see that Uganda is trying out a vaccine. Even if Uganda got a vaccine, who will accept it? So these are issues that we must resolve as countries. So as we celebrate, I prefer to use the word mark 58th independence anniversary, I could only say not yet Uhuru.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I want to call this the end of the show. I want to thank my panelists who are right here with me, apart from the professor. Thank you very much, Francis Muhire, for your views. Thank you very much, Enoch Jumba, for your views. Thank you, Christine Masibo, for your views. And after 58 years from now, which year will it be? That will be, we shall not be here maybe, or maybe we shall be here. We hope Uganda will be better than this. We hope we won't come back to say 116 years ago Uganda was at par with South Korea, and South Korea this. We should come back with a different story then. That's why the equilibrium is here, and we shall always bring this and more interesting topics about the economy in Uganda. Happy birthday, Uganda, and thanks for tuning in and viewing the equilibrium. I remain Dan Ayebele, your host. Let me see you next week. Bye.